Wonderful. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for a session which is really about supporting your students and protecting your pipeline. And that's going to start with the first 30 minutes looking at our study hub experience, or our online learning centre experience, if you prefer. And then we'll move into a separate 30 minutes looking at the evolution and revolution of transnational education. Firstly, though, I'd like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the family, elders and ancestors of the Gadigal people from the Eora Nation, which is where I'm coming to you from today. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians from the land on which you are joining us as well. My name is Marnie Watson, and I am the Managing Director of SUNM S4 for Australia and New Zealand. I've been working in the international education industry for 25 years, based across Indonesia, Vietnam and Singapore. And now coming to you from Sydney, where I've been working with SUNM S4 for the last 6 months. I am joined today by Mr. Heike Manning. Heike is SUNM's Executive Director for Southeast Asia, and he's also the former New Zealand Ambassador to Vietnam. Heike has extensive experience in transnational education in Vietnam, and he also brings a very valuable combination of government-linked experience from being a senior diplomat across Vietnam, Brazil, India, and China, but also that entrepreneurial drive, which comes from having established, founded, and been the CEO of his own international education consultancy business before he joined SUNM S4. Heike is joining us from Vietnam, where he's lived for the last 9 years. We've also got Mr. Pete Richards on the line. Pete is our Executive Director for our UK and Europe business. Pete's joining us extremely early in the morning from the UK. Pete has more than a decade working in the international education industry, Macquarie Business School, Henley Business School, Navitas, and most recently at Coventry University, where he led a team who are responsible for the identification and onboarding of a network of transnational education partners, and importantly managed a group of 45 transnational education partners across the globe. We're also joined by my colleague Divya Sani, who is our South Asia and India expert for transnational education. Divya brings a lot of knowledge about the opportunities and challenges that are arising from the new developments with the new education policy in India. Divya is not speaking today, but she's on the line with us. And so please make sure any questions you have are also covering our South Asia opportunities. Heike, if you'd like to share the slides with us. So what we are going to cover off today, we've talked about. And so if we just dive straight in, what I wanted to really look at in terms of the study hubs is, I want to talk about the fact that over the last 18 months, we've been researching and watching the developments that have occurred around these online learning centres or study hubs as they've been established by institutions and utilised by students, especially in China. Many of these developments have proven extremely valuable for both the students and the institutions. And really that comes down to the fact that it's a provision of an environment to students which is suitable for their study needs, which is motivational by having peers around them, and offers them really that support and guidance. For institutions, it's been an important way of demonstrating a commitment to the students, to the agents, to the markets in which these students and agents are based. And really, as we said at the start with the name of the presentation today, really protecting the pipeline as we all learn to navigate the new travel requirements, and students slowly perhaps adapt to those changing travel requirements. If we look at the next slide, you can see here that we're talking about our study hub, first of all, that commenced in Vietnam in July. So we've got 6 months of experience operating there, and Heike is actually going to share with us shortly some more of the practical day-to-day realities of operating what we call our study hub in Vietnam. We're also planning on an opportunity to open hubs in New Delhi, Mumbai, Bangkok, Jakarta, and Kuala Lumpur for the semester 1 2022. If we look at the next slide, Heike, we use the word independent intentionally in the heading of this slide. So our experience with study hubs has been about providing an efficient, flexible, cost-effective mechanism for universities to enter a market, provide a service to students to help them with their learning process, which does not involve setting up a third-party contract with an institution or a university in that country. And what that means is creating a fast and effective way of getting into market, which is, as I've said already, cost effective. One of the other important points here is to remember that the Sanlam S4 team, we are predominantly based in these markets. And so what that means is there's a service, a wraparound service provided to institutions as they establish themselves in these markets, which Heike will talk to you more about. In terms of the concept we've established for the study hubs, it's really about a blended student experience. So yes, we're identifying suitable cost-effective co-working spaces, but we're also providing this wraparound service of what we call a catalyst, which is an academic support person, a navigator, which is really the hub manager providing that pastoral support, and what we call the beacon, someone who's providing some career guidance as well. If we look at each of those in more detail, so the catalyst, as I said, this is really somebody who's not doing any delivery, of course, of the program, but rather they're providing some study skills. So note-taking, efficient reading, public speaking skills, skills that are really helping the students as they, in some cases, are starting for their first time a university program, but having to take that online. If we look at the navigator, the role of the navigator, I would summarize probably in two ways. The first is that they are there for the pastoral support and the welfare support of the students, making sure they're safe and they're happy within their study hub environment. But also their role is importantly about driving usage of the study hub. So really creating that social networking opportunity for students to be interacting with each other, which from our research has been such an important part of the study hub opportunity. And finally, on the beacon, so the beacon provides students with an opportunity really just to talk about their career objectives, have some counselling around employment opportunities in the future, and interestingly, have the opportunity to interact with students who are located across other countries as well. What I'm going to do now is pass to Heike for the real life experience of operating these study hubs in Vietnam. Thanks, Heike.
Thanks, Marnie, and good afternoon, everyone. Still late morning here in Ho Chi Minh City, but it's nice to be with you all. And really looking forward, we hope at some point to see you here back in Vietnam. The study hub experience here has been a really interesting one. And as you can see, when we launched our Vietnam study hub in July, there was quite a lot of interest in it, not only from media, but also from institutions. And we started off working with University of Auckland and Up Education for the first cohorts, which launched in July. Before I provide a little bit more detail on the actual workings of the hub itself, is a couple of student testimonials from students from the University of Auckland. So Kevin talked about, how it provided him for, sort of a place to kind of connect with other students, sort of a stress reducer, and also the added support, study support that he got from our tutors. And then Zuyan talked about, sort of just the information that was really helpful for her, particularly connecting her to New Zealand and to the University of Auckland. So that's really good to get that feedback that we're really adding value to the students' experience. To make it a little bit more real, you can see here the team that we've assembled here to support the study hub. So our operations manager, Ms. Nhi, who's really sort of at the heart of the operation and is the one who's very engaged with the students on a day-to-day basis, but also with our institutions. We have the beacons or the career counsellors who are available to talk to the students about where they're going with their study. So it's not about study counselling at all. It's about sort of that broader sort of career and professional pathway. And then we have, for Vietnam at least anyway, we've sort of broken down the catalyst or the study skills support piece into two parts. The first one is English language opportunities, and we have what's called an English conversation club. And that's really not designed to be any sort of lessons. It's more just a chance for students to come together and to gain confidence in speaking English together. And then on the right-hand side here, we have our study skills partner. So we've partnered here with a company called Suma, and Suma is one of the top international tutor companies here in Ho Chi Minh City. And they've put together for us and deliver a series of study skills workshops. So in terms of a sample student calendar, this is how we imagined it, and this is sort of how more or less it sort of worked out. So the students have access to the hub for about 3 days a week, and if they wish to, they could come in the mornings and use the study hub while they're doing their classes online with their institutions. And then in the afternoon on Tuesdays and Thursdays, we have provided those additional support services for the students that wish to take them up, whether those are the study skills workshops, the coffee talk and social engagement sessions, or those Beacon career guidance sessions. So those coffee sessions, as you can see here, and this is just a sample again, are really designed to sort of connect the students to each other, have a nice, sort of fun time to learn about some interesting non-study related subjects, but also to connect the students to their destination. So you can see here as you look through the different sessions that we run sessions relating to the country they're going to the institution they're going to. We've connected them to existing students who are studying at those institutions from, in this case, from Vietnam. And we've brought in guest speakers as well to talk to the students, and particularly, for example, around cross-cultural etiquette and also well-being during lockdown. So you can see a sort of a rich variety of different subjects just to keep students engaged and connected. And then in terms of the study support itself, those workshops and sessions that our tutor partner offers, you can see here that we had set out about a 15-week program covering a range of study skills that we felt were useful for students that were studying or starting their studies online. And many of those also are starting their studies internationally for the first time. So we felt that this was a good mix of study skills support to offer to those students. In terms of the space, here's some images from the study hub in Vietnam, and you can see this is, for those of you who have been to Ho Chi Minh City, this is looking back from the study hub location back to the central city. So we're about 3 kilometres from the centre of District 1. Those of you with sharp eyes will see that there's a new bridge that's been built since Vietnam's been closed off. So you can't stop progress here. And you can see in the left-hand corner there, the new building, which the co-working space is located in. So it's a really good location, super well connected to the rest of the city. And then inside, we are working with Sunwa Innovation Centre, and you can see that in terms of the co-working space, the hot desk space, it's very nice. It sort of has a bit of a campus feel to it. There's not only hot desk space, but also lots of spaces for informal breakouts, as well as meeting room space that we use for study skills and other activities as well. So really a multi-purpose space. In terms of other hubs that we are looking at launching for semester 1 2022, we also have, as Marnie mentioned, plans to open in Malaysia. And you can see here, again, that sort of the kind of the core aspects of this are well-appointed facilities, well located as well. So we're partnering across Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand with a global co-working provider, which, as I said, you can see the facilities hopefully are going to offer a really attractive option to your students and students that use the Study Hub, because they can access it conveniently and it offers everything that they need to support their online study. And finally, last but not least, also we have plans to launch the Study Hubs in New Delhi and also in Mumbai from February 2022. So again, similar sort of setup, and here's some of the space specifications which really highlight, I think, or the key things to highlight are those safe, comfortable, well-appointed facilities, good connectivity, including good quality internet connectivity, multi-flex space as well. Just a really good location for students who maybe don't have the space they need at home to study in comfort and to really be able to succeed in their studies. So that's what we've been offering. And really just to say before we finish up, that one of the things that we found here in Vietnam was obviously during the lockdown in recent months was we couldn't always access the space at the Study Hub. And so we developed, working with our partners, we developed a solution to deliver some of those support services online to the students as well. So they had access to localized tutors, to the localized career guidance counselors, and also access to those coffee sessions as well. Obviously, that's not ideal, and I think a lot of it is around the space and the connectivity, but the feedback from the students, even while we were in online mode, was very, very positive. So with that, I'll hand back to Marnie. Thank you.
Thanks, Heike. So we would really love to take your questions. There's in the chat box, you should be able to just type in any questions you have for us, and we would be delighted to answer them. While we wait for some questions to come through, Heike, we obviously, as an organisation, have talked a lot about the longevity of these hubs, even as Australia begins to be opening up. Maybe just share with us your perspective on the opportunity for longevity, because the reality is our contracts with existing partners go well beyond semester 1 2022.
Yeah, thanks, Barney. So yes, at the moment, certainly for the Vietnam Study Hub, we have commitments through 2022. And I think that reflects an assessment, at least by some of our clients, that there will obviously, and we all hope for it, there will be reopening of borders reasonably soon. But there may still be a few twists in the tail with COVID in the coming time, and in terms of that student mobility piece. So they're really looking to, I guess, protect their position and really look at how they can support students and have that that option in place if they need it in case of unexpected events, either the Australia and New Zealand end, or indeed at the Vietnam end as well. So I think, yeah, that's probably the first part of the question, Marnie. I can come back to another part later if you wish.
For sure. We've got a question here around the payment model. Is it a user pay system or a cost sharing arrangement?
Thank you. Thanks for the question. So the way in which we've operated the system here in Vietnam has been, it's an arrangement that we have with our institutional clients, so a B2B arrangement, and the institutions pay a membership or a registration fee to join the hub, to be a part of it, and then they pay on a per student basis depending on the number of students that actually take up the services with us. And we tend to have a requirement for a minimum cohort of students from each institution, which for Vietnam we've set at 5. And the reason why we set it at 5 is because we want to make this as accessible as possible to institutions to enable them to support their students.
Thanks, Heike. Alex is just commenting on the capacity. So, obviously we've got this minimum cohort to make it easily accessible. And if I may, I'm asking you a question, but I'm going to jump in with a comment. I think one of the conversations I've been having with some universities lately is just around the fact that the intentional model we've taken to try and make it accessible, low cost accessible, means that if you think about, the money we might have spent in the past on a 2-week trip to market, here you are suddenly getting a full semester, 3-day a week, 9 hours a week sort of presence for your organization. So just an interesting thought around that. But I got distracted, Heike. So the question is around the capacity of the hubs, and also the point around students who are not living in, Ho Chi Minh City, Bangkok, KL, India, Mumbai, their access to virtual services.
Yeah, thanks, and great questions. Thanks, Alex. So in terms of the capacity, certainly here in Vietnam, and I'll speak maybe just to that one, Marnie may have some comments on the other ones. We actually have, capacity to scale up considerably. The co-working space is large. We can actually access other co-working spaces if we need them. And we also have that support from our partners to be able to scale up, no problem. Your second part of your question around students being able to have virtual access, actually that's been our experience, and right now we actually have some students who are with us at the Vietnam Study Hub who are not in Ho Chi Minh City and who are actually receiving that study support online. So we imagine as we move into 2022 that will certainly be an option which is available to students that can't make it here.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in on the capacity point. Some of the conversations we've been having are literally up to into the hundreds. So if there were students in the hundreds that need to access a hubs, which is potentially a particularly relevant point for the India situation, that is absolutely something we can also accommodate. Are there any other questions from anyone? While we wait and see, oh, here we go. Do you want to, Jack's just made the comment around how did you cope within the pandemic situation, given you've just come out, Heike? You've been out for what, 3 weeks now, 2.5, 3 weeks?
Yeah, thanks. Thank you for asking. Yes, it was quite tough. I mean, I think, everyone has had their own experience of lockdown and COVID fatigue, but certainly here in Ho Chi Minh City, it was a pretty tough lockdown for quite a while. And, what's really good now is that what we've seen is a real uptick in vaccination rates here. So Ho Chi Minh City for adults over 18 is, I think, something, I don't know, it's pretty similar to Australia levels, up over 80%, I think, double dosed. So that's a really good thing. And now the city is starting to return to normal as it can return to in the current environment we live in.
Can alumni or professors come to speak with the students, Heike?
Yes, so certainly, the way we've designed the coffee sessions in particular is we really welcome, guest speakers, and if institutions have inspiring alumni or professionals who want to come in and talk to the students, that's great. And we really, we work alongside our institutional clients to try and tailor those sessions to make them as useful as possible. So yeah, that's a really good idea and something we like to do.
And I think, if I may, just to reiterate though, so it's not about delivery in these hubs. So absolutely welcome people to come in for that interaction and support with the students, but just not delivery of the programs. The delivery is online delivery from the home country professors. So a question around the university branding in the spaces, and just that point that maybe if I just jump in, I'll let you answer, Heike, but I'll just jump in around within SunMS4, we've got a team of legal taxation experts who are very conscious around this branding aspect, because it's very important people are aware of permitted establishment risk, and we can provide advice around that to our partners, to clients who join us for this. But Heike, if you'd like to talk practically just around the branding aspect.
Yeah, so in terms of how we've done it here in Ho Chi Minh City to date is, again, sort of mindful of some of those, sort of the regulatory requirements and so forth, and also as a way of keeping costs down. We've offered a quite a light touch kind of flexible model for institutions. And so what that means is very much, the hot desk type model for students to access, when they do have a need or when we are running those classes. And the branding that then is on offer is very much non-permanent. So with our current clients, it's standees that they put up or we will put up on their behalf when they have their students coming in. There may be opportunities for some digital signage as well, but that's certainly not permanent and is really available when the students are accessing the centre.
And maybe I realize there's a question before, we'll come back to it, but just because we're sort of on the topic, Rongyu just asked a question around legislative or regulatory requirements around setting these hubs up in the various cities.
Yes, Mani, I don't know whether you want to comment on anything outside of Vietnam, but really just to make again the point that we've tried to set it up in such a way here in Vietnam to make sure that we are and our clients are in compliance and avoiding any of those legislative and regulatory risks. So that's why, for example, we don't offer any tutoring services ourselves. I mean, that's not our business anyway as Sanam, but we work instead with a licensed, highly credible tutor company to provide those services to our clients, students.
Exactly. I think, Heike, you've summarized it perfectly. So it's third party. And again, we have offices in these locations, but these are not our offices in which we're offering the opportunity for students to come and learn. These are in third party co-working spaces, which are quite separate. And so that regulatory piece, Rongyu, is a very important part of what we've looked at as we've stepped into this process. And again, as I've said, we can talk more through that. Question here from Anabdas. Is the online learning centre primarily for non-affluent background students who are still interested in getting an international degree?
So it's a great question. The online learning centres at the moment, and certainly here for Vietnam, are for students who are enrolled to, obviously, and are studying at an institution offshore, whether that's in Australia or in New Zealand. And so those students are full fee paying students, and those students maybe in the ordinary course of events would be transferring to their campus for campus study. So it's not designed specifically, at least in this current iteration, for non-affluent students. It's designed to support existing students who would otherwise be transferring offshore.
Thanks, Heike. I'm conscious of time. We've got about 2 minutes before we're going to move into a separate conversation, which is around the evolution and revolution of transnational education, which Pete's going to lead on. Question here: what's your take on equalisation levy tax on online trade and service specific to the India market? We and I would love. I'll take that offline and very happy to engage with you about it. Within the Sanam S4 team in India, we've been in operation there for 13 years. As I mentioned before, we've got a team of legal advisory, taxation advisory staff who are very experienced in this area. So very happy to pick that up and have a conversation offline with you about it. It would be our pleasure. Any other questions? Last chance before we do a little handover to Pete. Just watching our chat box. All right, we might leave it there on the study hubs or the online learning centres. We can use either name, but thank you all so much for the questions. Very happy to have separate conversations with you around any of these locations, any of the implications of these locations, and of course, the Vietnam experience being one that we've lived over the last 6 months. Very happy to share more information around that, or share with you any references from institutions or students who've been involved, if that helps. What we're going to look at next is moving into, as I said, the transnational education revolution and evolution, and what particularly Pete, who's come from an experience very recently of managing these 45 institutions across the globe, and really thinking about why you would set up a TNE, how you would think about going in that direction, and what we're seeing happening. So Pete's going to start off the session for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then Heike's going to pick that up again, share some on the ground Vietnam experience related to the evolution and revolution. But remember also that we have Divya on the line, and although Divya is not going to be talking today, she is deeply experienced in that India, South Asia angle of transnational education, and very happy to answer any questions that are specific to India. Pete, all yours. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Marnie. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. It's very much morning here, but it's a pleasure to actually be here and talk about a subject that I'm pretty passionate about, having, as Marnie said, led the transnational education team for Coventry University. For those of you that don't know Coventry University, it's a big provider of TNE. In terms of the sort of HESA data and the stats that you can read publicly available, Coventry is the largest UK provider of TNE, outside of a couple of institutions that use a very different model, like the Open University or the University of London, which is a consortium of online courses actually blended together under one umbrella. But we had over 20,000, just to tick over 20,000 active TNE learners in the last cycle at Coventry. So it's a big entity that we have there from a TNE perspective. So we'll get straight into it, if that's okay, Heike, if you want to flip to the next slide. And I think the first thing I need to do is to say that a lot of what I have to say this morning, this evening, this afternoon comes through a UK lens. So it's probably just worth talking to you a little bit about how the differences, the slight nuanced differences of the UK TNE landscape versus other delivery markets, if that makes sense, and the size of it, the scope of it, the dynamics of it. And then we can overlay some other data a little later, I think, in Heike's presentation from a different lens. But certainly from a UK perspective, UK TNE provision is very large. You know, a number of years ago, actually, TNE provision overtook inbound student recruitment for the UK in terms of volume. And in the 2019-20 cycle, we've got nearly 500,000 students now studying a UK award via a TNE model somewhere else in the world. So it's a very big part of the higher education pie here. And it's grown steadily for many years. Just looking at the last sort of 5 years of growth, it's grown from 380,000 students up to, you know, just a tick under 500,000. So it's growing at a pace still. And I think it's worth mentioning from a regulatory perspective, this is really important. The lion's share, 2/3 of UK TNE provision is actually done via the validation and franchise delivery model. And that's quite important because there's no regulatory need from a UK perspective for a UK university to deliver any part of the award. Oftentimes, UK institutions do via a flying faculty model or a digital version of flying faculty. Certainly in China, we do have to do that as part of the UK Sino agreements. And Coventry University had 4 full-time academics physically living in China to do that with our partners. But there is no regulatory need for a UK university to deliver any part of the award. So Coventry University or any other university could validate or franchise a course into most markets, regulate it, audit it, quality control it, but would not necessarily have to have any part of delivering that award, either in the country of delivery or welcoming those students onshore for an element of their course. And I think that accounts for why the UK volume in TNE is so large, actually. Online and distance learning is sort of pulled into the data set as well that we see and we report from a UK TNE perspective, but it's actually relatively small, smaller than you might think, as is branch campus delivery. You know, branch campuses are becoming a little bit more popular, certainly in markets we see in North Africa and the Middle East and other regions, but the big lion's share of this is sort of joint degree, dual degree, and franchise and validated delivery. So that's my kind of preamble, if that makes sense, around what the UK TNE sector looks like and will continue to look like, I'm sure. Second point, to go back a slide, if that's okay, Heike. Yeah, evolution and revolution. It's a really important point, actually. You know, there's been an awful lot said, certainly in webinars and various seminars here in the UK, particularly, about perhaps traditional models of T&E dying, at the hands of this big revolution that's coming with T&E. And I tend to kind of disagree with that sentiment a little bit. There will be a lot of evolution, I think, of the current models, and there will be a revolution with an explosion of new models and opportunities, I think. But the relevance of traditional transactional T&E will remain, I'm sure, and market forces will very much dictate that. Next slide, if you can, Heike, thank you. I think if we move then to evolution, and the obvious point here, I think, is that sort of traditional sort of shift and lift, a colonial sort of lift and shift approach to T&E will very much disappear. It is disappearing already, but I think that will kind of pick up pace in a post-COVID world. So I think a lot of awarding institutions now are far more prepared to deviate away from what's traditionally been a very rigid curriculum or pedagogy, and will be happier to sort of evolve that and work with the partner institution to evolve that and make it fit for purpose for different countries. A really good example of that at my time with Macquarie Business School, actually. It had an absolutely wonderful lecturer that worked tremendously well in the Sydney market. When he transferred over and used that same pedagogy at the Hong Kong campus, it sort of didn't work, if that makes sense, because the style of teaching and learning in that market is very different. So I think there's a much bigger recognition, particularly from UK universities, which have probably been more guilty of this than Australian ones, in my experience, a move away from that dictatorial colonial style of lift and shift T&E provision will disappear, and already is, which is a very, very good thing. I think the second part for me around evolution, a lot of the T&E partnerships, certainly in the UK and certainly for Coventry actually, are extremely tactile. Very tactile partnerships with a lot of content delivered via flying faculty, even though there's no regulatory need to do that. It's something that a lot of UK universities were keen to do. A lot of kind of quality control and auditing from the delivering university, traveling into country and getting very hands-on with things like pre and post moderation and exam boards and so on. And COVID really sort of forced the hand of a sentiment that was already sort of occurring, if that makes sense. I think a lot of universities are trying to sort of move away from that a little bit. From a carbon footprint perspective, we have COP26 happening here in the UK right now, so it's quite an on vogue topic. But certainly Coventry was looking at how we can reduce the that sort of heavy touch, lots of travel approach to T&E. A little bit of resistance from quarters of the university, particularly around quality control. But COVID forced our hand, and the sky didn't cave in. I think we were able to moderate our T&E providers perfectly well without traveling to them. And certainly those elements of course design where we had to deliver an element of the course, we managed to perform that very well in a digital environment. So I think from a sustainability perspective, we'll see a much more reduced contact with international partners. And I'm pretty certain that won't have an impact on the quality of provision and the quality of student outcomes. So that's the next evolution, I think, that's sort of occurring right now that will continue to pick up at pace. And I think also a lot of universities, certainly here in the UK, are starting to become much more aware of the importance that T&E has from an access perspective. And if we really are serious about that, we have to look at geo-pricing models and affordability. There are certain regions where the affordability of higher education via a T&E model is a little harder to achieve. Sub-Saharan Africa springs to mind. And I think a lot of universities are now realizing that if they are very serious about using T&E delivery to widen global access, they have to look at geo-pricing models and really look at affordability of programs in countries that are a lot more price sensitive. And that includes not only the consumer-based fee, obviously, but also the fees that return to the awarding institution as a result of the partnership. And a lot of universities here in the UK are wrapping their arms around that and getting their arms around affordability issues as well. But I think also the most important one, and I'm sure this is the case all over the world, the higher education sector is, I wouldn't say suffering, but I think a lot of universities are now looking at their P&L and their balance sheet a lot closer, given the pandemic in particular. And I think every institution that awards via a T&E model are pretty guilty of having I don't know, we call them passion projects potentially, where academics have got together and developed this wonderful T&E partnership that might deliver a really low volume of students and doesn't actually deliver anything else in terms of research. They're just two institutions that like each other, and they operate a T&E model. I think that'll disappear. T&E for the sake of T&E will have to disappear, I think, as the universities grapple with their P&Ls and balance sheets. And I think that's a really important sentiment to hammer home, I think, because when any institution on either side of the partnership is looking to develop a partnership, they both have to start with a really serious question of why, frankly. And I'm not sure if we can flip onto the next slide, I think. There we go. And there's a lot of reasons why universities would wish to enter T&E, and I've listed some of them. This is an exhaustive list. It's not an exhaustive list, sorry, but there's lots of reasons why institutions might want to engage in T&E activity. And I think awarding institutions, delivering institutions need to have a very, very honest conversation about why they're doing it and what the tangible outcomes will be. And you know, having that conversation about whether it is to generate revenue, is it to create a wider international student footprint, or is it a little bit more noble around the academic piece of nurturing other opportunities such as research, or you know, adding an international flavor to the curriculum, and so on and so on and so on. And I think the answer to this question is really interesting, because it's very, very rare, I find, that one partner or a very small and narrow element of partners can deliver all of those things. What typically happens in my experience is that the answer to that question of why can be an and rather than an or if you have a really, really good portfolio mix. So looking at the, you know, my experience and other universities here in the UK, they'll have some wonderful peer-to-peer partnerships and peer-to-peer relationships with co-curriculum design, with faculty exchange, with students from both universities working together on project work and so on. But you know, those tend to be quite small in terms of volume and revenue generation. Actually, you know, you tend to find the really good volume T&E partnerships for the benefit of widening an international footprint and generating revenue tend to be very different partnerships. They tend to not mesh well, if that makes sense. So I think portfolio mix is a really, really important piece here. You know, if you want to tick a lot of those boxes on that sub bullet point, you probably need multiple partners that are serving different versions of that, rather than go for that kind of holy grail unicorn partner that will deliver you everything, because in my experience, that typically does not exist. Next slide, Heike, if that's okay. And revolution is a really interesting point as well. And you know, it's very easy to talk about where, you know, I've been to a lot of webinars where the revolution of T&E tends to very quickly turn into a conversation about where the emerging markets will be, or what interesting courses will emerge over the next decade. And they're kind of noble conversation points, I think. But for me, the really thought-provoking conversation here is how can and how will T&E be delivered over the next decade, and what is the art of the possible with various models. And I think for me, the biggest piece of this will be a real uplift and a shift of gears, if you like, in terms of that blend of online provision with T&E delivery models. I'll use Coventry again, excuse me for that, but they have a good suite of online courses and a really amazing network of T&E partners. The fun for me is how those gears can mesh together, and our T&E partners can get a hand on our online courses and almost take the study hub model, but via a T&E delivery model, and start to deliver the online courses in a blended format. So I think a lot of universities we will see over the next sort of 3 to 5 years start to leverage their T&E partners actually as deliverers of blended learning on behalf of the awarding institution. Micro-credentials, micro-credentialing is becoming much more popular already, but I can just see that picking up at pace quite dramatically over the next year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. And probably 2 of the last 5 partners at Coventry onboarded actually were edtech companies that had created really good, short, sharp, career-relevant, focused micro-credentials, often in partnership actually with an entity, with a For example, Xero, the accounting software, had worked with one of our partners to develop a micro-credential. They'd also worked with Salesforce to look at a marketing micro-credential. And the UK university was kind of coming in to offer some credit bearing, kudos to that, in that kind of tripartite arrangement. And the real fun in this space, I think, is how micro-credentials can be built on top of one another to do two things, actually, to bolt together to form a meaningful qualification. That could be a certificate or a diploma, or it could be to bolt them all together to create a really meaningful level of advanced standing to progress to a university and maybe skip the first year. So EdTech companies are looking very hard at that. You know, how can they kind of take that credit bearing element of micro-credentials and really ramp that up, which is really important, I think.
Pete, sorry to be the little voice from nowhere, just a 1-minute warning.
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah, almost done. Validation of courses delivered in a non-English language is also important, and we look at that from a Latin American perspective in particular. You know, if we get comfortable with validating courses delivered in Spanish, that opens a whole new market, I think. Pathway delivered offshore via a network of T&E partners as well. And also very much the emergence of joint venture and PPP arrangements, particularly in markets like North Africa and CIS, Commonwealth of Independent States. I think that's me done just about on time, I think. But that's where we're sort of seeing the evolution and revolution of T&E from a UK perspective right now.
Thanks, Pete, and maybe I'll just pick up from there and offer just a few minutes, almost as a kind of a response to Pete's ideas around evolution and revolution of T&E with a sort of a quick Vietnam perspective on these things. And just to say from the start that I'm sure you guys know as well as me, or if not better, that obviously Australia has amazing standing here in terms of its branding and its profile, and it's a very strong student attractor for Vietnamese students, and it's also a very strong T&E market for Australia. And I'm sure you've seen this slide a number of times, but the Melbourne Centre for Study for Higher Education in 2020, which surveyed higher education institutions, ranked Vietnam second globally after China as a destination for future offshore T&E. So certainly there seems to be a lot of interest from Australian providers, which I think is well justified. So talking about the evolution of T&E here in Vietnam, really just to say that, you know, it's evolved in a slightly different way to what you've seen in other markets, like in Malaysia, for example, or Singapore. Instead of, you know, institutions, international partners being invited in to deliver their programs independently, it's been very much around a collaborative type approach is what the Vietnamese government has wanted to encourage. And there are good reasons for that, political reasons, but also they want to build the capacity of their own institutions. So as a result of that, the most popular type of program that's evolved here have been those joint training programs, dual degree twinning arrangements, increasingly franchise, which I'll talk about in a minute. While independent delivery, like through branch campuses, is almost not a feature of the landscape at the moment. And RMIT here is really a unicorn, I think, in terms of that type of setup. In terms of the types of programs and the interests that we've seen here, how it's evolved. So the vast majority of programs here in terms of joint training programs, T&E, is focused traditionally on business, economics and management. But actually what we're seeing now is we're seeing a growth in interest in science and technology and STEM subjects, which is quite an interesting trend to see in the market. Some key T&E trends that we do see here in Vietnam. I think just briefly to mention those, the first one is sort of an increased focus on 100% in-country delivery. So we're seeing an uptick in interest in franchise models, 4+0 joint programs, and also the emergence of micro campuses. And I can answer some questions about that later, but and a really, really good example of a micro campus is Swinburne with their partnership with FPT, which has come up really quickly and is looking like it will be really successful here. And that really enables Swinburne to have a branded presence here and to deliver its programs under franchise through its local partner. The second major trend is around online and blended delivery of T&E. And the Vietnamese government now recognises that joint training programs can be delivered in that format. And I think we're still working through the detail. It's still early days, but I think it's a really important signpost for the future. As Pete mentioned, I think we're going to see a lot more in that space as we move forward. You know, because it offers so much flexibility to students, but also to institutions as well in terms of mode of delivery. And the third T&E trend, just to mention, is the growth of the private universities here in Vietnam. And as Pete mentioned in his comments as well, he sees that as one sort of major trend, I think, in, you know, which will guide T&E delivery in future. And all of those 3 points, I think, point to you know, institutions looking to address that middle-class consumer demand for international qualifications to be delivered at a lower price point than would be open to students if they travelled to Australia, for example, for a full award. Here's a couple of bits of feedback, I guess, from some of the emerging players in the T&E and the higher education landscape here. And the first one is from a Vietnamese private university, which I was talking to them recently, and they said, our 5-year vision is for our university to deliver only internationally recognised degree programs in English, which is a real shift away from what they've been doing until now, which is predominantly Vietnamese programs, some of which is delivered in English, but which are non-internationally accredited. So a real bold vision, and obviously they're going to need international partners to help them deliver that vision. The second one is a major Vietnamese education company, which has just raised a lot of funds internationally recently. And they're talking about making access affordable at a disruptive cost, bringing accredited world-class curriculum to Vietnamese students. And the third one is from a recently established university, Vinh Uni, which is set up by Vietnam's #1 conglomerate here, Vinh Group. And they have a slightly different aspiration. Their aspiration is to be a top 50 young university of the world. So you can see here across the board, you've got some really interesting aspiration statements relating to international qualifications delivered in country, you know, low cost or, you know, sort of at a good price, and also from Vinh Uni about that aspiration to become a globally recognised institution. So my last slide really is just to talk about where we see this going in terms of that revolution piece. Where is this all heading towards? I agree with Pete that we're going to see a lot more interest and activity around online and blended delivery as you know, either as an option for students and institutions. And it will, you know, really depend on levels which it's delivered as well. So really interesting opportunities, I think, in postgraduate space as well for those blended delivery options. The second one is unbundling, or as Pete talked about, sort of micro-credentials. Still very early days here, but I can see that it's going to be really attractive to the market, particularly in that industry and work learning space. Where you have professionals who want to upskill and accredit and are looking for you know, flexible pathways to do that. The third one is deeper strategic partnerships, and that speaks to the Vinh Uni institutions here in Vietnam that have aspirations to become you know, world-class institutions. So they're not looking just for program transfer and for franchise. They're looking for faculty exchange, they're looking for student exchange, they're looking for programs, they're looking for research collaboration. And these institutions will get there. They will improve their quality substantially in the coming years. So I think getting in early or relatively early is going to be really important for international providers. And the final one, as I mentioned, is commercial T&E partnerships with those private unis, many of whom are just looking at how they can solve a problem in the market, which is addressing that middle class market demand. So there's a lot of really interesting developments here in Vietnam. And of course here now, Sanam has its office, which we've set up here in Ho Chi Minh City to support providers navigate their way through the T&E landscape here. The final thing I would say just before I hand back is that I think the direction of travel here for Vietnam is really interesting, and we're going to be entering a really interesting time for T&E in Vietnam. But the government, because of the political system and because of the caution, they remain the ultimate arbiter. So really staying close to the regulations, understanding how it's working and where it's going is really important in terms of plotting out your T&E pathway here in Vietnam. So that's it from me, and I'll hand back to Mani. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heike and Pete. It's now time for our colleagues to please jump in with some questions in the chat box, just to help me out to make sure, sorry, I'm over in the chat box distracted. Just help me out to make sure you put the message across to everyone's helpful. Otherwise, because I missed a couple of questions earlier with the study hubs, I confess, which we can come back to depending on how we go with questions here. Maybe as we wait for any questions to come in, Pete, a question for yourself, just to, during your presentation, you were sharing some really interesting anecdotes for us. What comes to mind if I ask you about one of your most successful T&E partnerships? Why does that come to mind for you? What is it about the model, the type of partnership, the duration of it, whatever it may be?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And there are many that I could reference, but I'll reference the sort of branch campus arrangement that Coventry created in Egypt, actually. And I think the reason why that sticks in my mind is Coventry University became involved in that project very, very early on, and even kind of became involved in the discussion with the Egyptian Ministry of Higher Education around a regulatory change that would facilitate what we ultimately ended up doing with a private company, Al Saudi Electric in North Africa. So piece of regulatory change that would allow for private companies basically and joint venture capitalists to create campuses, physical bricks and mortar campuses, and then invite international universities into that environment to deliver the intellectual property. So what really stuck in my mind about that project was the fact that Coventry and other British universities were involved in the negotiation with the Ministry of Higher Education to kind of consult and create that piece of regulatory change in the first place. And Coventry early adopted with Hertfordshire, actually. They were the two first UK universities to take advantage of that, find a private partner. And I project managed that for a year, actually. And it started with a conversation with the PVC International where they'd literally just put a spade in the ground in the new capital of Cairo, piece of red desert, essentially, with lots of bricks everywhere lying on the ground, with the vision of actually having students studying at that campus the following September, 9 months later. So we had to work very, very hard and have a kind of Prince 2 mentality towards managing that project. Awful lot to do. It was interesting, partnering with a private entity that didn't necessarily understand higher education. They talk very, very different languages, I think. Higher education is a fairly unique sector with a unique parlance, and to be kind of talking with basically a power generation company about creating a university was quite fascinating. And at times everybody just sort of did that and missed each other, I think. But,
don't use acronyms. You might get very lost.
Yeah, exactly. But that was a fun project and we did it. Yeah.
Brilliant. Love it. Great story. Thank you. We've got a question just generically, and can I just keep in mind, maybe just keep this to less than a minute for me because we're going to stop on the hour and we've only got 2 minutes left. So question, is the UK experiencing issues with changes in China regulation of foreign partnerships?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And with 45 seconds, I'll try to answer that. China's a very interesting market. It has a regulatory environment all on its own. I mentioned earlier validation, franchise delivery. UK universities don't have to have any fingerprints on the delivery. The exception is China. The parlance that we use to explain T&E is quite contained. The exception is China. We have that very sort of unique model, which is quite tricky to navigate in the first place. But the very short answer is yes, Joanna, and I'm very happy to reach out directly and give you a more deep answer. But I think the emergence of China and their ambition, I think, to just attract inbound student recruitment and be an importer of higher education rather than an exporter of higher education. might be the wrong way around, is interesting for all of us, I think. Australia, New Zealand, British, Canadian, US institutions. I'll take that offline because it's not something we can cover in a minute, I don't think.
Yeah, no, Pete, thank you so much. I am actually going to wrap us up here. Depending on where you are in Australia or elsewhere, but we really are at the end of the day. So I'd like to wish everyone a fantastic weekend. A special thank you to my colleague Pete, who is dialing in from the UK. So have a look at time zones. It's rather bright and early. Heike, thank you so much for your deep insights into all things Vietnam. And Divya, I know you're there in the background. Thank you so much for being available to join us. And colleagues, it's wonderful to have the chance to chat with you, and we would be delighted to do that more. So please feel free to reach out to us and have a lovely weekend. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.